Under certain conditions and at certain times, most plants will wilt. And it's one of those things that a lot of gardeners have trouble with, understanding just how much wilt is enough. But it really isn't something you need to be that concerned about. Join me today as we discuss plant wilt. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and sitting on the edge of this bed looking at these plants, I see a dramatic difference every day in how these plants react to the heat of the sun. The radishes at the end of the bed show very little wilting, and the kale almost no wilting at all. But the Swiss chard and the golden beets, well, they don't like the heat of the sun at all, and they will wilt dramatically. And I'll show you that over the course of this video. From right now, when they're nice and erect and fresh looking, to the end of the day, after they've been exposed to the sun and the heat, and you'll be able to see what I mean. Other plants that are notorious for their wilting are pumpkins and squashes like zucchini. It's morning, pretty early morning, and right now the pumpkins are reaching for the sun. The zucchini looks great. No sign of wilt at all. It's the same with these cucumbers and with this yellow crookneck squash. It's early morning, they're turgid, nice and erect, reaching for the sun. They haven't even thought about wilting yet. It's now early afternoon, and the cucumbers are starting to show some signs of wilting. And the yellow squash, these large leaves are beginning to wilt as well. The beets and the chard are doing okay for now, but they are starting to droop, to wilt just a little bit. And the big leaves of these pumpkins and zucchini are also starting to show signs of wilting. But I'm not worried at all at this point, because light to moderate wilting is completely normal. This is how plants deal with the heat of the sun, especially the plants with big leaves. You can think of it as the way the plant breathes. It's called transpiration. And when the soil is nice and moist, the roots are absorbing that moisture, and it's sending all that moisture and all those nutrients into the plant, up the stems and stalks, into those leaves, and that's how the plant grows. That process of transpiration is conducted by cells on the bottom of the leaves. They're called stomata. And when the stomata opens up, it creates a pressure differential, which causes the fluid to rise up through the plant. Well, that fluid that is rising through the plant, that water vapor that escapes through the stomata, is very important for the transfer of nutrients. But if allowed to run without stop, all the moisture will eventually escape the leaves, leaving the plant dry. And it could kill the plant if it can't have any of that moisture in it. So what happens during the heat of the day is that the stomata close. All of those cells close up and stop the transpiration process. No more fluid moving up to the plant, no more water vapor escaping the plant, and the result is that the turgidity, the erectness of the plant, begins to falter. That is what wilting is. The plant begins to settle a little bit, fade a little bit, waiting for cooler conditions for that stomata, that cell, to open up and start the whole process again. Now, to be precise, each of those openings, each of those pores is called a stoma, and it's the grouping of the pores that is called the stomata. Those individual cells that actually control the opening and closing are parenchyma. Now, That's an awful lot to remember. I think Stomata sounds like a police organization, and therefore I remember the Stomata as the group that controls the transpiration. It's late afternoon, slightly overcast. The sun will be setting soon, and it's been 24 hours since these plants received any water. So it's time to water them, normal daily watering schedule. Let's go ahead and take a look to see how they've recovered from the afternoon wilt. I haven't watered these pumpkins yet, and you can still see they're pretty wilted. Until just a couple minutes ago, they've been in sun. But the zucchini has been in the shade of the shed for about an hour now. And without any water, the leaves have pretty much bounced back and are looking pretty good. And these pumpkins, again with no water but with some shade, are looking pretty close to normal. Very few signs of wilt. The chard and the beets are still a little wilted. They just received some of that cloud cover a few moments ago, but I'm guessing they're going to recover pretty quickly. And the cucumbers, which have been in full sun most of the day, are really showing the most signs of wilting. But with the overcast, the yellow squash has really bounced back. And this is all before I've done any watering. So I'll go ahead and water the plants normally. This will really help them recover from any wilting that they've been doing, because the soil will be replenished with moisture, and that'll help all of the fluids and that water vapor get the plants into their normal state. So after some good watering, I'll let them sit overnight, and I'll be back in the morning to see how they've recovered. And now the next morning, the cucumbers have completely recovered. There's a little bit of dew on the leaves. The squash shows no sign at all of any type of wilting. And the pumpkins and the zucchini are actually almost pointed. They're so turgid, they're standing straight up, trying to soak up all of this morning sun. No sign of wilting here either. The same with the beets, and especially the Swiss chard. Again, standing straight up, trying to soak in the morning sun. So there you have a demonstration of an actual day in the life of a garden plant. Starting the morning, awake and erect, ready to soak up the sun through photosynthesis. But then, in the heat of the day, stopping transpiration and allowing some wilting to set in. A little bit of overcast or shade, and the transpiration starts back up again, and the plant becomes erect again. And particularly overnight in the cooler conditions, the next morning is completely revitalized, ready to start the whole process over again. It's important to understand that this is a normal process of plants, because too many gardeners end up harming their plants or even killing their plants because they don't understand that wilting is normal. The natural response to seeing a wilted plant is to assume that the plant is thirsty. It needs more water. And so that's what a lot of gardeners do, give the plant more water. And the plant ends up being overwatered, which can lead to a whole bunch of problems, to include possible death. But just having some patience and understanding that the plants will bounce back normally in time can save you from that overwatering dilemma. Now, I showed you what happens to the plants in my garden on a typical summer day. It wasn't overly hot when I filmed, but during those days where the heat is intense, and I've had a number of those days this summer, there can be some damage to the plants. They might not bounce back completely after wilting. You'll often see it on the edges of the leaves, particularly the big leaf plants like the pumpkins and the squashes. And if you have back-to-back days where a leaf has wilted and not fully recovered before the heat sets in and it wilts again, this is some of the damage you might expect. It's not terribly serious, but the edges of some of the plants on the very top of the plant are going to be the ones that suffer most. As you go into the plant, the leaves that have a little bit of shade from the bigger leaves above are not going to show that kind of cellular damage. The best way to deal with wilting and avoid some of that leaf damage is consistent watering. Try to have your soil consistently moist all the time. Let the plant do what it normally does with transpiration, starting and stopping as needed. As long as there's moisture in the soil, the plant will be able to recover fine. Where you can run into problems is when you allow the soil to dry out right at the point it needs that soil moisture to recover from the wilting. That's one reason why I water later in the day, so the soil is moist throughout the evening. The plant can recover and then start the day nice and robust. But I have a dry climate, so I can do that. I don't have to worry about fungal issues because the plants are too wet at night. I know most gardeners tend to water in the morning, and that's perfectly fine to combat wilt. You just may need additional watering. When I have days that are 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit above normal, I'm often watering in the morning and the evening to keep the soil moist enough for my plants. Again, because I live in such a dry area. Think about your plant and your plant's needs when it comes to watering, and you'll be able to handle wilting with no problems whatsoever. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.